Good afternoon, and welcome to Praxis Peace Institute's Friday Forum. I'm Georgia Kelly, the director of Praxis. Today, we are dealing with a politically topical subject, namely what has happened to our country in the past 18 months, and how will we survive another 20 months of this madness. Ira Shapiro, our guest today, is the co-editor and author with Ann Kim of Betrayed, America Didn't Vote for This, which was published in May of this year. The book is a report from several contributors who are offering both a damage assessment of where we are and the importance of the 2026 midterm elections in November, which we will talk about today. Ira Shapiro is a lawyer, a longtime senior Senate staffer, and former U.S. trade official. He served as general counsel in the Office of the U.S. Trade Representative and then as chief U.S. negotiator with Japan and Canada with the rank of ambassador. He is the author of a trilogy of narrative histories about the Senate, starting with The Last Great Senate, Courage and Statesmanship in Times of Crisis, which was nominated for a Pulitzer Prize. Earlier, he was legislative counsel to Senator Gaylord Nelson, the founder of Earth Day. And we also had the opportunity to host Ira Shapiro 4 years ago on this program. And we are honored to have you back again with us today to talk about your latest book, Betrayed, America Didn't Vote for This. So welcome, Ira. It's great to have you back.
Georgia, it's wonderful to be with you.
Thank
It was a
you.
memorable interview 4 years ago, and I'm really happy that you were interested in having me back.
Anytime, just let me know. Um, so I want to start with actually the title, and this is a little bit of a sideways question, but I wanted to start with it because you say America didn't vote for this, and yet even today, they're 36, Trump has a 36% approval rating, even now, which is shocking to probably all of us. But this 36% is a third of the voters. And in one way, they did vote for this. So I'd like you to comment just on that. The people who actually did vote for this, maybe they didn't totally know it, but they still haven't changed their mind. Do you have anything to say about that?
Well, we've thought about that a lot, and we picked the title carefully. Um, when we say America didn't vote for this, we know that a lot of opponents of Trump, particularly Democrats, didn't vote for this. But we actually think that the scope of what he's doing is not supported by a large number of his voters. They voted for, we think, secure borders, let's say, lower prices, a strong economy, perhaps a war on wokeness. We can and expressed disgruntlement with the Democratic Party and the debacle that the Democrats presented them with in 2024, in my view. They voted for those things. They didn't vote for mass deportations of their neighbors, detention camps. They didn't vote for ICE in the cities. They didn't vote for the cover up of the Epstein files. They certainly didn't vote for the Iran war, in my view. And as you look at the issues more closely, you wonder how many Americans really voted to undermine research on cancer and other diseases in the way that the administration has done. So you go down the list and you find that a lot of people didn't vote for much of what Trump's doing. And Georgia, the bottom line, though, is they expected a president who would be working for them and their interests, as opposed to someone who was on kind of a revenge tour
Mhm.
and also interested in self-glorification and accumulation of wealth. So I think, look, 36% is pretty low, but I think he's heading toward the 20s.
Good. That's good to hear. I think you're right. You noted in the book that many of our government agencies have been gutted, including our embassies, USAID, and some of the agencies that continue to exist are headed by incompetent and uninformed people like RFK Jr. I don't know if you saw the latest thing he was saying. We'll deal with that later. Or Lee Zeldin, who heads the EPA and doesn't believe there's a climate crisis. So, can you give us a brief list of the government agencies? Because I found that you listed more in the book that I knew of that have been eliminated, gutted, or captured, and how this is continuing to erode government services, where it's headed, and how it's really destroying our democracy.
Well, that question alone would take a couple of hours. But I think that we have to sort of step back and understand the ambitious nature of the agenda here,
Mhm.
which people would say was expressed with some candor in Project 2025. It was clear that 2025, the Heritage Foundation 900-page report, envisioned a significant dismantling of the federal government. They said that clearly enough. What they didn't say, I mean, Trump denied that he was in favor of 2025, but let's leave that aside. What they didn't say was, oh, not only is this our agenda, but we plan to do it unilaterally. We plan to usurp the responsibilities of Congress and just simply abolish executive agencies, simply lay off people who are independent forces within the government, and essentially move with great speed, and starting out with Elon Musk and Doge, move with great speed, sort of a shock and awe presidency. We will do these things so fast that you won't be able to keep up. We'll go from one thing to another and you won't be able to keep track of them, but you won't be able to keep up in the sense that even though much of it is illegal, it will take too long for the courts to stop us if they're going to stop us. And so what you find is that I would say almost every major agency has been affected. The numbers are quite startling. There are something like 10,000 lawyers that have left the Justice Department. But you go through the agencies, and we're talking about particularly agencies that dealt with health and science, as well as the EPA, NOAA. You go through it and you discover that it was not only far-reaching and deep, it was systematic in the sense that, and here I will single out one architect of this program, which would be Russell Vought, who is the head of OMB. He was the head of OMB in the first part of the first Trump term, and he spent 4 years preparing for the dismantlement of the government this time. And so if you look at the Justice Department, for instance, they've driven out many of the most experienced lawyers. But at Justice and also at other agencies, they've also focused on the probationary employees, the people who would be the next generation of public servants. They've either fired them or they've forced them to consider their futures. And how long will it take to rebuild our capabilities in these areas?
Actually, that was one of my questions is like, how long will it take? Would a Democratic Congress, if we have the majority in November, possibly the Senate, would they be able to do anything about these? Or is this really coming from the president himself and we can't do
Well,
anything?
it's clearly coming from the president himself. And the phrase gets used sometimes that we're suffering generational harm. By that, I mean, even a Democratic president being elected in 2028 wouldn't be able to throw a switch and restore things. It would take a considerable amount of time to rebuild the expertise in some of the agencies and to convince people that working in the federal government was a good idea. I mean, so the plan, such as it is was multifaceted and multi-layered. Um, and in every area, you can see that it was very carefully thought out. I want to distinguish, though, between you use two names, Georgia, that I would like to distinguish between RFK Jr. on the one hand and Lee Zeldin. RFK Jr. is really something of a fanatic, particularly where vaccines are concerned. Lee Zeldin is an unprincipled opportunist, somebody who believed in protecting environment when he was a congressman from Long Island. I think it was Long Island. But after that, when Trump offered him the best job he could imagine, he changed 180 degrees. So RFK Jr. was a fanatic, but Lee Zeldin is just an unprincipled opportunist.
As
and
our
they've got a good collection of both.
right. Since we were talking about courts, I was going to ask this later, but I'll get into it now. I think one thing that is particularly troubling under Trump is the court system, especially the Supreme Court. As you noted in the book, federal appellate judges appointed by Trump sided with the administration 92% of the time at 2025. I mean, that's clearly a captured court. The Supreme Court also ruled in the administration's favor 21 out of 24 times in 2025. So this is not a principled Supreme Court. It's a captured court. And what do you see could be done about this? I mean, this seems like a very serious problem because of having no term limits on the justices. Would you support term limits on justices? And also, what would you think about the expansion of the court when the Democrats get back in power?
I've written several articles in support of term limits for justices. I've also noted that I thought Chief Justice Roberts could set a good example by retiring at the 20-year mark. Because when Roberts was a brilliant young lawyer in the administration of Ronald Reagan, he advocated 15-year term limits for federal judges. Now, that was a long time ago, and he wasn't talking about himself. But I think there is great sense, bipartisan sense, that term limits for Supreme Court justices would be a good idea, and I think we will see it happen. I personally believe that the court should be expanded. I think the corrupted confirmation process run by Mitch McConnell that produced a court that is, the term is often applied to it as conservative. There's nothing conservative about this court. The better term would be extreme or radical or lawless. They have, led by Roberts and also spearheaded by Samuel Alito and Clarence Thomas. This is a radical court with an agenda, and they've moved very rapidly to try to act on things they've believed in for decades.
Right.
Decades.
Yeah, it's been kind of a shocking move to see all this. I'm going to move to tariffs right now because this was this is another problem area. And you wrote about how the Trump tariffs have impacted U.S. trade relations with Canada, Europe, and other partners as well. And the impact of these tariffs domestically on small businesses, household, and our prices generally, from groceries to gas. These tariffs have meant that people are really struggling financially. And of course, this is not what they voted for. And you noted that farm bankruptcies, I thought this was interesting. I did not know this at all, rose by 46% in 2025 over 2024. And that 100,000 manufacturing jobs have been lost since the beginning of 2025. So I'd like you to comment a little about this and how the tariffs are driving other countries to seek trade relationships with China rather than us.
I think that I always start by saying that I want to give Trump his due in the sense that the one thing he really cares about and believes in is his longstanding view that America has been suckered in trade. He has always believed that. It's what got him into public life in 1987. He took out newspaper ads about how Japan was ripping us off. He has always believed that. And to some extent, Georgia, as a former trade official, I know that we've had a very robust would be a modest word for it, a 30-year debate over trade in our country. There's a lot of people on the side of, we should be tougher on trade, and they don't believe in trade agreements, et cetera. So it's been a very vigorous debate. What Trump has done now, though, in his reliance on tariffs, goes far beyond what he did in the first term and has had the effect of, as you say, imposing costs on American consumers and American business. He likes to say, where China is paying for the tariffs. That's, of course, nonsense. Americans are paying for the tariffs. So that has had a very significant effect on prices and made people struggle. Beyond that, though, the point that you make is he has unilaterally sought to revise our trade relationships with every country in a way that's quite unpredictable. It's one thing to go back to Canada, Mexico, Europe, et cetera, and say, look, we've looked at this trade situation. The agreement was reached X years ago. It doesn't work for us. Let's talk about how this can be revised. It's another thing to just do it unilaterally. And he has hit virtually every country in the world in a way that is both destabilizing and counterproductive because it drives them toward more reliable trading partners. Mm-hmm. It is ironic, since 10 or 11 years ago, we had a pretty strong consensus building that we and our allies had to come together to counter China and their industrial policies. Trump has left us isolated. More countries think of China as reliable than think of the United States.
Yeah, so how do you see the role of China on the global stage in the next few years?
I think it's enormous. And I think that, look, how to put this, China's rise in a couple of stages since 1979 is one of the most remarkable things in world history. They have literally lifted hundreds of millions of people out of poverty. Mm-hmm. I read a statistic the other day that in 1990, 43% of the world's population lived in extreme poverty. Today, it's 10%. Many people in China, but elsewhere, have been able to advance out of extreme poverty because of China's rise. At the same time, China plays trade and industrial game differently than other countries. They've taken advantage of our open markets, and their state capitalism is very contrary to the way we operate. So I believe they're going to play a major role. They have established incredible leadership in all kinds of sectors. Used to be basic manufacturing, but now it's all kinds of advanced manufacturing. As you know, they're by far the leaders in batteries, in advanced electric cars, and generally solar and other technologies. So China's position on the world stage is very powerful. But I will say, neither President Xi or President Putin, Premier Xi or Putin, could have imagined an American president who would do so much harm to our country. He's like, it's like if they had wished for destruction or damage to our country, they couldn't have gotten more.
Yeah, it's really, really been shocking. And I do certainly have been watching China and watching young people at universities, especially in Europe, who saw China as a rising star 10 years ago. Well, we didn't see it yet necessarily, but they did. And about the electric vehicles, which are being sold in Europe, but not here because of our tariffs. So we don't know a lot of times what is being sold from China to other countries because they aren't allowed here. And certainly we saw the Chinese buses when we were in Cuba 10 years ago that were excellent, air-conditioned, wonderful buses that came from China. We don't have those here either. So I want to go to the climate right now. I'm going to go to the election last because I think, well, I guess we don't have a lot of time, but I wanted to get to climate because Trump's, I don't know whether it's a bill or whether it was just one of his memes, the Unleashing American Energy, that directed federal agencies to prioritize fossil fuels and undo climate protections pretty much across the board. Even Santa Barbara now is open for drilling, or it's possible. And 13, as you noted, 13 million acres of federal lands were open to coal leasing, and environmental standards for mercury and other toxic chemicals have been removed. And you also noted that US coal increased by 13% last year, and the EPA dismantling of air quality and pollution protections. And, as you just mentioned, China now dominates EV sales. So, what is this focus on fossil fuel when we need to be radically getting away from it? How are we going to undo this in the short term? Because it's going to have to be done in the short term.
Well, I think we're going to have to undo it with a Democratic president and a Democratic Congress. I do think that the economics of climate make the economics of energy make it possible to envision solar and wind as the technologies of the future. The price point has changed, as you know, radically. Mm-hmm. And so, I mean, China is not in solar and wind only because they want to bedevil us. They know that it's the technologies of the future, and they've helped bring costs down. But this is one of those areas where you can't possibly look at what the United States needs and then look at what the Trump administration has done and found any possible coordination of that. Joe Biden made mistakes and different things, but his acts and the Inflation Reduction Act, particularly, the commitments he made to wind power and solar power and batteries, these were all very important for our future. And Trump has undone most of those. So we're going to have to redo it again. And yeah, it's very frustrating.
He paid a company. Oh,
so we're all sitting under here in the East, we're sitting under a heat dome.
Right.
We're watching Europe heat up at twice the rate of the rest of the world. Anyone who thinks that climate is not a serious existential problem hasn't been looking at the world.
No. Ideologues. There's so many areas that the book's covered. I just want to mention them before I get into another question. One is you talked about the politicalization of the military, which is very frightening because this could be a fascist dictator's personal army, and that is a scary thing. So these are some of the chapters in the book, which I think are really important. Substituting ideology and intuition for science. the attack on education. We can't get into all these right now. But I wanted to bring up one thing before we get into my last question, which will be on the election in November. But you mentioned the Monroe Doctrine, for example, that it was originally something that was to keep Europe out of Latin America. But in many ways, I see the Monroe Doctrine just an extension of the Monroe Doctrine, where the capturing of the president or the capturing of the president of Venezuela now, but there was an attempt on the capturing or assassinating Hugo Chavez several years ago, which didn't work. Then there was threatening the invasion of Cuba. But the Monroe Doctrine also, I think, in following that, we overthrew Allende in Chile, Arbenz in Guatemala. So there's so many areas where the Monroe Doctrine just seems like a precursor to the Monroe Doctrine. So I'd like to just get your opinion on that.
I think that I think we have interests in the hemisphere, but we haven't always been a very good neighbor in the hemisphere. It took a great deal of work by many people to establish a positive relationship with Mexico and to overcome, the Yankee imperialism generally in the hemisphere. I think that our Cuba policy under many presidents has been a disaster. Made no sense at all at any given point in time. I feel that we made progress with certain countries like Brazil and Colombia. Trump doesn't like those countries, so he's been undoing some of that progress. I think ultimately we're a global power and we've had interests all over the world. And the idea that we were simply going to focus more on Latin America, if we're going to focus on Latin America, we shouldn't have undone all of our soft power and diplomacy efforts.
Mm-hmm.
It's simply not the way to deal with Latin America.
Well put. Now I want to just go to the election in November because after Trump's speech last night, which I didn't listen to, but I read a couple of things about it. I mean, he is so intent on making people fear that the election will be fraudulent. And so that either they won't vote, which I think that does happen to a lot of people. You mentioned something that I thought was quite hilarious, that one of the Republicans who was, crying about the election fraud was actually someone who voted 9 times himself and was caught for it. I mean, I thought it was just a perfect example of, scapegoating someone else for what you're doing yourself. But I want you to comment on how we need to look at this election because we need a strong turnout in November to really counter what's going on. And I think, can take the House. We should take the Senate. Do you have any thoughts about that and how we can go about that? And the fear of what's happening with what they could do to jeopardize the actual voting on the day of the election.
Well, I'd like to give you a more optimistic view, but I don't have one, in the sense that I believe that it is quite certain that is Trump's strategy and the Republican strategy to try to undermine the election, to raise doubts in people's mind, to deter people from voting, to prevent them from voting where they can. And I don't know that it can be overcome in any way but by people simply determining that they're going to vote and not be deterred no matter what. Now, when I say that, I want to make it clear there are large number of organizations with great lawyers and strategic thinkers working to try to combat what Trump and his team are doing. There are war games about how to deal with this all the time. They're working on the key states. They know where the vulnerabilities are. At the same time, it's still possible that the Republicans will find a way to try to undermine these elections. And, you have to give Trump credit for one thing. He doesn't do much secretly. He's sort of out in the open, telling you he's the only person I know who thinks our elections are fraudulent when he loses, when he wins, when he's not in the elections. He's done an extraordinary job of trying to undermine confidence in our elections, which by itself is totally unacceptable for an American. There's never been a president who's done anything like this.
Yeah, it's kind of shocking. And just one thing about the 2028 election, it's been obvious that the last couple of times that Trump did win, that the focus of the Republican Party was on the Electoral College. It was not on the mass of voters across the country. Their focus was getting those states where they could win the election without the popular vote. And I'm sure that will be their focus again if they haven't dismantled the election system entirely. Any thoughts on that? And then I wanted to open up for any questions from people who are here live with us today.
Well, I'm not in favor of the electoral college system, but as long as we have it, I think certainly any candidate can be strategic about trying to put together their 270 electoral votes. So among the things, that's not something I would be critical of Trump and the Republicans for trying to do. It's everything else that they're trying to do, from the mid-decade reapportionment that they've come up with to clear evidence that they're trying to undermine mail-in voting yet again. The Supreme Court's cooperation in undermining voting rights for African Americans and other minorities has been very serious. So the only answer to this is a massive turnout and not being deterred in any way from voting. I don't think Trump can possibly, and the Republicans can possibly come close to winning many of these elections, but it requires a turnout to prove it.
Right. And why I brought up the electoral colleges, I think the Democrats need to focus on that in 2028. They need to understand that all those states with votes that could determine the election are really important. So
Well,
now,
and it has, and look, there are certain things that have happened in the country that, you know, when I was growing up, the electoral votes in the Northeast and Midwest were far more substantial as a part of the overall picture than they are now. The growth of Texas and Florida, particularly, has changed, and some of the other states, but particularly those two, has changed the electoral balance. But I want to give you one positive thought, Georgia. My positive thought is there's a chance that this most divisive president will yet unify many people, unify 75% of us in opposition to his presidency. It's been that extreme. And when I say that America didn't vote for this, I think that he will be down to 25% before too long.
well, I hope you are right. And I want just before we open, just to mention the book again is Betrayed. America Didn't Vote for This. It's an extraordinary book and a lot of the information we want to know, especially going toward the next election. I highly recommend it. And now questions. Anyone want to ask something or make a comment or go ahead, Fran. You have to unmute.
So, thank you for your perspectives. I appreciate the knowledge that stands behind what you're saying. You noted that you would be in favor of the Democrats expanding the court if they get in power. And my question is this: if they expand the court, and then we have a time when the Republicans are in charge, won't they expand the court? And it goes on until I don't know how big a court we have. So how does expanding the court uh, deal with that problem?
It's a good question. And I think the answer is that you have to make a very strong case that the confirmation process that we had was sufficiently corrupted and that the court needs to be enlarged, probably to 13. And then you have to say, and that's it for the time being. We'll see how that works, but there will be no significant majority that would be strong enough to enlarge it further. Now, I don't mean to say it'll be easy to do the first time. The Republicans will fight it to the extent they can, with everything they have. It's going to require an overwhelming popular support. You can expand the court, by the way, without a constitutional amendment.
Mm-hmm.
You can expand the court statutorily. It's been done over the years, was done over the years until 1869. But obviously, it'll be a major challenge.
Right. I still don't understand if the Democrats say expand the court, as you're suggesting, to 13, what is the means by which you would prevent the Republicans now get in power and they expand the court by another 4, and on and on?
Well, I'm hoping that there will be a significant Democratic victory in 2028, which would allow you to expand the court, and enough Democratic strength to resist what comes after that. In other words, it's not easy. It won't be easy to expand the court once. It certainly won't be easy to expand it once and then have the other side expand it. But look, I
mean, this would be subject to filibuster, is that right?
Yeah, well, yes, probably. It depends if they change the Senate rules. But look, one of the things that's remarkable about this, the Republicans have said, we had to have a conservative majority in the court. They've had a conservative majority in the court since 1969, when Richard Nixon became president. Shortly thereafter, Nixon appointed and got through 4 Supreme Court justices. When they say they want a conservative majority, what they mean is they want an extreme majority, because they didn't like Sandra Day O'Connor or David Souter or Harry Blackmun. One Republican, John Paul Stevens. These were all nominated by Republican presidents.
Okay.
They weren't extreme enough for the Federalist Society.
Yeah.
And they kept pushing. And eventually, thanks to McConnell and thanks to their own efforts, they won the day. So there's a lot to regret about what happened and how we got here. The question is, at some point, what to try to do about it.
Yeah, and as long as the justices are life appointments, there really is no other option but to expand it. I wouldn't really worry so much about what the Republicans might do later. I think, in a way, that thinking has stopped Democrats from doing a lot of things. I mean,
that's true.
That's just,
I mean, look, any of us who are Democrats, being honest, would say that the Republicans' long focus on the court, single-minded focus on the court, was proved to be successful. They got some good breaks, including Ruth Bader Ginsburg staying too long on the court.
So sad.
That was a tragedy.
Mhm.
But, and I don't think I was a Obama supporter, like many people. I don't think he did enough to overcome McConnell
Mhm.
when McConnell refused to
Mhm.
consider the nomination of Merrick Garland in 2016.
A year
That was a
before.
hinge in history.
Yeah,
Obama should have done more.
right. Totally agree. It was a very frustrating moment. Does anyone else have a question?
I do.
Go ahead,
And
Brian.
so, Ira, this has been fantastic. Thank you for being here. I got two quick questions for you. So, as you know, Trump wants to increase the military war machine budget. It's at 900 billion right now. He wants to take it to 1.6 trillion. Where are the Democrats speaking out against this? And also, the second question, where are the Democrats speaking out against this invasion of Iran? This that's costing us hundreds of billions of dollars.
Brian, thanks for the question. I do think there are Democrats who are speaking out against both. Um, but the fact is, they've been out of power and ineffective. I can point you to individual speeches that are about as good as you would like, but it's not coming across in a concerted way as a party position.
Hmm.
The idea of increasing the military budget in that way at a time when Ukraine is showing and others are showing that drone warfare is drone and AI directed warfare is the wave of the future, as opposed to these massive weapon systems that we build at great expense. Uh, it's we need. This is a time when we really need superb thinking at the Pentagon. Instead, we have Pete Hegseth, which is a tragedy. And I want to say, well, one thing about my book, I wanted to say, the group that we had was the Common Sense Coalition. We called it that out of respect for Thomas Paine's great pamphlet during the Revolution. We tried to keep the book short and price it low so that people would actually get it and tell their friends to get it. It's a book. The substance of the book, I think, is important, but I also think it's an organizing tool.
Mhm.
I think we try to mobilize people around the notion that this is unacceptable damage, and it's not what America voted for.
Yeah.
And also, Ira, about the invasion of Iran, okay?
Yeah.
Why aren't more Democrats saying this is insane? This is crazy.
Well, many of them have and are. I
Okay.
mean, there's a the Democrats have been almost unanimous in that the invasion of Iran was a bad idea. The problem that we've learned over the years is presidential power in war making is very difficult to constrain.
Mhm.
We saw that regrettably in Vietnam. We saw that in Iraq, although to the credit of Bush and Cheney, at least they sought congressional approval, even though they sought it on misleading grounds.
Right.
But it's very difficult to unroll this. What's going to stop the war in Iran is that it was so badly conceived that Trump had no idea what he's getting himself into. And he's gotten us in the country into a very bad place. And we'll see what happens now. But I do think Democratic opposition to it and the public's anger about it is going to fuel a victory in 2026.
Yeah.
Right.
Anyway, yeah, go ahead, Fran.
Well, just following up on that, at, at this point, given the mess that Trump has created, do you see any viable way out?
Um, I think I think it won't be easy to see a way out. I
Yeah.
think what Trump has done has proven to the world that the United States is feckless and less powerful than anyone imagined,
Right,
that Iran has much more leverage than anyone imagined. I
right.
think it's going to take other countries around the world to get the Strait of Hormuz open, and not the United States. We're not going to be able to do it by ourselves,
Yeah.
number one. Number two, for many, many years, people have thought about this despicable regime in Iran. Every president since Carter has had to think about it.
Mhm.
And they all didn't like the regime, and they all concluded that you couldn't topple it by violence solely.
Right.
Of course, in part because one of the first things that would happen was the Strait of Hormuz would be closed.
Mhm.
Every president was constrained by that reality. Trump wasn't constrained by it because he's an irrational thinker. He doesn't have good advisors. He doesn't read. He operates on impulse and instinct and self-interest. So, look, I'm someone who, after 10 weeks of this term, wrote on Substack, "Seen enough, impeach and remove already."
Mhm.
I think that my fear was that this was an authoritarian presidency unlike any in our history, and that it wouldn't end unless he was removed from office.
Mhm.
The political realities are such that that hasn't happened and probably won't happen. So the second best is a crushing defeat in 2026,
Mhm.
which would represent the rejection of this despicable presidency.
Mhm.
So, Ira, just to follow up on that, why even consider impeaching when we don't have the Senate, much less the House?
Mhm.
Well, that's why people aren't considering impeaching.
Mhm.
I think from my standpoint, it is the constitutional method for dealing with a president who abuses his powers the way Trump has. And I was going to say, having said that, I should also say we've never had a president who has abused his powers to this extent.
Right.
So I was reluctant to give up on the constitutional mechanism, but I understand the political reality. So the next best thing you can do is win one or both houses of Congress, investigate, remove, and impeach some of his officials,
Mhm.
perhaps Hegseth, etc.,
Mhm.
and make it clear that the United States, a vast majority of the United States public, believes that this presidency is a tragic mistake that should be rejected.
Yeah, it seems like we don't
Well
have the
said.
mechanisms for removing him. The 25th Amendment would be impossible with the vice president. I mean, it's not going to happen.
Well, I've got a plan for that too. I
Oh,
was,
what is it?
since we're talking, I said to somebody the other day, I said, look, I got into politics and government for two reasons. One, I was a product of the Vietnam years, and that made me think that public service would be a good idea. And number two, I love to read political novels.
Me too.
We've been living through a bad political novel for a long time. So I can come up with all kinds of scenarios. It seems to me that the Republicans really ought to think about invoking the 25th Amendment, making J.D. Vance the acting president, for a few weeks. There's a second stage where you pick the permanent successor, and that would be probably Rubio. And he could pick a Democratic vice president, and they'd have a chance in the next election. If I were the Republicans, I'd be thinking about that, but I'm sure they're not.
They're afraid to anyway.
Yeah.
So before we finish, is there anything else anyone wants to ask or contribute to the conversation? It's been really interesting. We've covered a lot of ground, and there was still more ground, but can't cover everything. But
Well,
science,
buy a
maybe
few copies of the book and share them with your friends.
great idea.
It's
Will do.
priced to sell. We realized that accounting for inflation over 250 years, it's cheaper than Thomas Paine's historic pamphlet. That was 2 shillings, and now that's the equivalent of $9.19, and our book is cheaper than that.
That's great. Again, it's betrayed. America didn't vote for this. And one other thing I just will bring up, since we got a couple of minutes, was the attack on science and health. Um, it's the money that's been taken out of Medicaid, the NIH, the research grants that have just disappeared, have been gutted. And what is this is doing to our public health infrastructure? It's just shocking, really.
It is shocking.
Yeah.
It is shocking. I mean, it's quite astonishing that we could have a president and an administration who would do this much harm to both our health and science and our economic prosperity, so much of which has been based on our leadership in science areas. And look, I've come across people, and I'm sure you know some. There are scientists I know that have moved to Ireland already. You know, they're not comfortable here because they're not sure that they can get their grants. They're not sure they'll be able to get their young science researchers, and they'll go elsewhere. It's quite a remarkable situation. And it's not anything that people in the country support. That's the frustrating thing, too. They don't support it. Congress has failed in its mediating role there. Now, Congress has, in fairness, Congress has restored some of the funding, a lot of the funding, but they haven't been able to counter the disruption and the undermining of confidence that the scientific community has.
Yeah, well, this has been an incredible hour, and I really appreciate your taking the time with us today, Ira, and covering as much as we've been able to cover from the book. I mean, it's just an extraordinary book because it is like a manual of what we need to be looking at, what we need to be aware of, and how important November is. Really, everything is riding on what we do in November and how we get the vote out.
Yeah,
It's critical. Anything you want to,
absolutely.
yeah.
Georgia, it's very wonderful of you to take the time and have me talk. I
Well,
appreciate it.
it's always interesting. I mean, it was 4 years ago, it is now, and hopefully we'll do it again too. Everyone will get the video link tonight, and it'll be public in a few weeks. So thank you very much, Ira. Really
Thank
appreciate
you,
it.
Ira. You are a real blessing. This has
Yeah.
been phenomenal. This has been extraordinary. You are a
Oh,
blessing
thanks
and
so much.
terrific.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you all.
We
Take
appreciate it.
care.
You
Everyone
too.
be well.
Yeah,
Want to
I'll be
see
in
you
touch.
again, Ira. Want to
Stay
see
out
you
of the
again.
heat.
Yeah.
I will be in touch with you, Ira.
Thank you, Georgia.
Thank you. Okay, let's see. Trying to.
Georgia, I only wish we had thousands of